Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Aoife. How are you getting on?
Good. And hello to everyone who is watching this evening. Thanks so much for tuning in. And hello to everyone who is watching from the future. Uh, hope everything's okay out there. Welcome to another episode of Access Loves Theatre, where we gather to talk about the joys of seeing and making live theatre. My name is Aoife Spillane-Hinks, and I'm the lead artist of the Pop-Up Lit department here at Access. And tonight is a special episode of Access Loves Theatre. As part of Scríobh, Access's Festival of New Writing in Irish, we're focusing this evening on theatre as Gaeilge, theatre in Irish. And with me this evening are three extraordinary practitioners who will have far more than an hour's worth of things to say about both working in theatre using the Irish language, as well as seeing work, live performance that uses the Irish language. So let me introduce those three folks to you, and thanks very much to the three of you for being here. We have Seán T Ó Meallaigh, who is an actor and a writer, and from all of the production shots I've seen taken by you, also a prolific photographer.
It's like, yeah, it's something that keeps me busy when we're rehearsing scenes that I'm not in. And yeah, I always have my camera with me.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's
You're
wonderful.
never safe when Sean's around.
No.
Seán, you're calling in from Stony Batter in Dublin tonight, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Lovely. And we do have to say up front that Seán will have to make a dramatic exit about about halfway through our proceedings to engage in another equally culturally valuable endeavor. Would you like to
Yes, the Irish football team are playing a very important match tonight, and it would break my heart to miss any of it. So, as much as I love Irish theatre, I love Irish football just as much.
Okay, just as much I can handle. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. We've also got Marc Mclaughlin here with us, and Marc is the artistic director at Branner, a company whose work we'll be discussing this evening. And Marc, you're in Headford in Galway, right?
Yes, I am.
Lovely, lovely. That's great. And we also have Zita Monahan Mclaughlin, who is an actor and theatre maker, and you are giving us a third county, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always one of my favorite things about living on Zoom is the feeling like you're in a room with people who are all over the country or all over the world.
Yeah.
And you're in Dublin, are you, Eva?
I am, yeah. Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
being all secretive. I'm in Whitehall.
She wouldn't say.
What was that? What was that about?
There's obviously some meaning to that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I'm not that far away from you, Seán, and I'm not too far away from the actual Access Ballymun. So
Okay.
So we're within a stone's throw. But yeah, so in the pre-show as we were preparing to go live here, and even just in the emails that I've been exchanging with the three of you over the last several days, it's been exhilarating to think about how much there is to talk about. And I'm in my head, I'm already thinking about at least a sequel to this, because there's productions, but there's also bigger questions about even calling it Irish language theatre, which are really worth unpacking and exploring. So we'll see what we can get through this evening and what we need to do going forward in terms of continuing the conversation. But ahead of this conversation, I did ask the three of you to tell me about some productions that you'd like to talk about. And there was one play that came up from all three of you, although I think we're talking about two different productions, and that's Craine Killa. And I wonder, for folks who might never have heard of that play, if one of you might be happy to just give us an introduction to the text itself.
Who wants to? Because
well, you started talking, Marc, so I'll let you take it away.
So we see the thing about it is it's not actually a play. It's a novel, and it's one of the great Irish novels in any language. Martin O'Kine wrote it, and it is it's just it's like it could be from any great European writer. It's set in a graveyard but underground, and the story is moved along by new corpses arriving, and everybody that's in the graveyard still have the same social structure as they had above ground, and they will talk to the people they should talk to and are wondering about people's opinion of them. And everybody wants to know, has their family put their headstone on yet? What is it? Was it a good stone? Have they did I get a good funeral? And they want to know the gossip. And so basically it's this eternal conversation about how we're so obsessed with structure of class and our community and gossip. But the thing that is so brilliant about the book is that it is it's written in an Irish that will never be used again, and it's written in Martin O'Kine had an ability to write in Irish that is he uses words that aren't in use anymore, and even it has been translated into English, thankfully, because Liam McInerney, I think, translated it, and he has since passed away. And he would have been, one of the few people left that would have the ability to translate it into in the way that it should be translated. So it's it's an amazing piece.
Marc's making it sound kind of very sort of possibly highfalutin or inaccessible. But one of the great things about it is that it is jam-packed with some of the greatest insults and charades of insults in any language. And like as Marc said, it's written in a particular Irish. And I think one of the things, certainly about the production that myself and Marc saw, is that the actors who were in it are the kind of actors who were of a particular generation that would have, I think pretty much all of them would have been or were native Irish speakers. So they were kind of, their Irish is as rich there as any Irish that was kind of still living. And they would have been people who would possibly have known the characters that Martin O'Kine based his book on. So like if they would have been sort of characters coming towards the end of their life when, say, these people were young people. So there was a kind of a connection there. You've got the likes of like Joe Stephen Nachton, who's since passed away, and Mclaughlin, who's still doing great work both as an adapter / writer and as an actor. He adapted the book for the stage, and some of the images
Nachton,
are great.
And a lot of the performers that were in this production were of the old Abbey company. So they would have started work in the Abbey when the Abbey used to do their Irish language plays. But they would have kind of they all have performed in English in major productions. But it was just I don't necessarily think it's an amazing play, but it was an amazing experience.
Yeah. And I think that it's something, because I was thinking about that earlier on, it's something like it's a classic example for me anyway of how Irish language theatre has sort of offered me the chance to connect with the part of my culture in a kind of authentic way that maybe English language theatre doesn't. And I'm not saying that it's better for that reason. And like I've probably seen better English language productions than I've seen Irish language productions, but the fact that it's in the Irish language and the fact that this was, like we were saying, based upon this phenomenal book that's kind of like, it's the equivalent in Irish to what Ulysses would be in English, to be honest, in terms of its standing. So like having that book adapted for stage and then presented by actors who were as close to the real thing as you could possibly get, it offers a kind of a very immediate connection to the past, which I think is great.
And there's something about access, isn't there? Like access to that richness, in Severus Teangasin. It's like there's about what are the ways in which we can access that. And I mean, for Craig na Cille, for me, Craig na Cille is was a way to access it and kind of tap into
Yeah.
what is this? I don't, and my experience of it wasn't really that I didn't really fully grasp the whole story, and it wasn't a kind of a I didn't fully understand the story when I was watching it for the first time. But what I did tap into was, wow, there is a richness of culture here that I now, as I sit in the audience, have access to, even if I don't fully understand all the beautiful subtleties in the language, everything. There's something about just being exposed to that.
And
That's
it's kind of
exciting.
like the work that Monahan is doing in kind of exploring words that are not in use anymore, and how those words, how one word in Irish can convey multiple meanings, and you need 3 or 4 sentences in English or any other language to convey that. So, but I actually think they did a radio play version of that with the same cast with Radio na Gaeltachta, and I find that to be its proper medium. I think that it works really well as a radio play because you get a chance to actually listen to the language. As a play, it's quite episodic because you just wait for people to arrive and who's going to come next and what are they going to fight about, and and Ababuna. Is it like Ababuna is Brídí Nachtan's phrase that she says all the time, and like so from that point of view, you're waiting for there's some brilliant quips in it. There's brilliant put downs. But I think the radio play version of it, I find that to be really the way that I like to listen to it. Now I haven't listened to it in a long time, but I think I way preferred it.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that. And how would you then? Where would you place? I know this is going off topic a bit, but where would you place the film in terms of the theatre production versus the film production versus the radio production? Marc?
I don't know. God, it's ages since I've seen the film, but they're quite similar though, aren't they? The film and the stage production are not that dissimilar, all right. Like the stage production, obviously, it was all about the underground part of it, whereas for the film version, you kind of got to go above ground every now and again, where you sort of saw the characters die before they then joined those people underneath. Yeah. But it was mostly the same actors, wasn't it? Yeah, that's the thing. You see, it's. I think so. What seems to be coming out here is the strength of the text and the richness of the cultural experience, and also the ability of the actors to convey that. I suppose it's a great thing that the film exists because it's a kind of a permanent record of those actors, in those characters, and that production in a way, which is great. Yeah. It kind of reminded me, I was watching Roxana Mclaughlин's piece that she did, Shukra, which I thought was brilliant. But that idea that she has about Runda and the different types of, so the word Runda means secretive, but then you put a preposition before it and it can mean multiple things. And I thought she did that brilliantly, the way that she conveyed the power of the language to be this almost, you see, we did a production, we did a production called Shrón the Changa there for Galway 2020. And the thing that is apparent is the richness in the language is something that it took us a whole airport and 5 different rooms to try and convey a bit of it. So the language has so much richness in it that a word can take you anywhere. It's like a rabbit hole, so I think that's what Craignaquilla kind of offers, is a window into that opportunity, into that past world. Now the thing is, we're never going to get it back again, and I think that it's okay to celebrate that, but sometimes I think there's that celebration of this thing that we're never going to get to the detriment of what we have now and what we could offer. And I think there's that tension always in the Irish language, and it's been there it's been there since the beginning of the state, and the revival of the Celtic revival, in that, don't give any money to the Gaeltacht because you might change it, and so that we can come down from Dublin in our suits and look at the beautiful Irish people and listen to them, So there's here's me coming from Kildare I was one of these people to come to the Gaeltacht but still it was it's that thing, that the celebration of the exquisite culture versus making it a living culture is this tension that always exists.
Well, and
Yes.
that's so interesting, because here you three are, and you're all not only people who engage in presenting pre-written plays, but all of you are engaged either all the time or frequently in making work, original work, or work that's responding, but you're part of its creation. So it feels like you're very much at the center of where Irish language theatre might be looking in terms of going forward. And I think, Marc, you're articulating a really interesting tension there, and I wonder, what is it like to be makers of original new work that uses the Irish language when there is that dynamic going on as well?
Depends. Some people will never have enough Irish in it. Some people will say there's too much in it. Some people say they're not good enough at speaking it, so don't do it. Some people say, oh yeah, I liked it. I think I understood what was going on. So see, making a show using our native language, it means that you encounter all of people's baggage, and they bring that there. You've to unpack it for them and hope that in some way they'll find their way in. So there is, that's what I think.
It's interesting, Marc, isn't it? Because I find, especially creating work as Gaeilge or being in a room where you're using Irish to rehearse, you kind of have to confront your own baggage and then realize, but then in confronting my own baggage with creating work as Gaeilge, or with the language itself and where I stand in it, my background coming into that, and then you realize, but we kind of have to what you said there about unpacking it for the audience, about there's something about permission, about it's okay if you're going to be the one person who has a different experience of this show because of your understanding. Either you really understand the language, or you don't, and you're in another place within that. You can still have a really meaningful theatrical experience.
That's if the theatre is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And like that would be, I suppose, to pick up on something that you said earlier on, Aoife, about, should we be calling it Irish language theatre? I would be kind of thinking, like, the danger with calling it Irish language theatre is that you're only going to attract an audience that is either Irish language speakers or people who want to learn Irish or kind of are learning Irish, and you're sort of packing it away from everyone else. Whereas if you just refer to it as theatre, and hopefully there'll be a stage in the future where it can be just referred to as theatre, and if it was on the main stage in the Abbey, you'll have people from Dublin going in there, you'll have tourists going in there to experience theatre, who kind of hopefully will not care what language it's in, because they're there to experience a kind of an authentic something in Irish, or something of Ireland, and not necessarily in any language. But there's probably a necessity to, for the moment, refer to it in some context anyway as Irish language theatre, so that it's brought up to a level that it can kind of compete with, or not compete with, but kind of stand side by side with theatre that's in English. Because I kind of feel like, for the Abbey, for example, I don't know when the last time the Abbey put an Irish language theatre on the main stage.
2015 in the Peacock, was that show that Paul Mercier did with Clean and Kevon, or Clean and Kisok? Was that in the Peacock?
Well, they've done it. There have been a few shows that have gone to the Peacock. That might have been one, Rail Team.
Yeah.
We did Satanta, that was in there about 2011 or 12. Buiche was in there.
Yeah.
Another production by the Taibhreach Idran Dáthúil that Siobhana Kelly was in there. And as far as I know, all these productions have done a week in the Peacock, and ticket sales have been very good, and have offered no reason as to why it couldn't be a longer run, or it couldn't be given a chance on the main stage. And I think it's definitely a sort of a chicken and the egg thing here, whereby somebody needs to take a chance.
Yeah, and I think there is something within the Abbey, not to pick on the Abbey, but there used to be a thing which was again this lip service thing where there was a 10 or 15-minute long Irish language play put on before all productions on the main stage. And so there's a whole glut of short shows in Irish that were kind of going, well, this is how we're going to sort this out now. People will see these plays and they'll love them. And so there was a necessity for the Abbey company to all be Irish speakers, and they all were, and they all kind of were able to do these short plays and also go on and do the main show as well. And then that kind of fell away, and the shows kind of moved to the Damer to be done in Irish. But again, that was part of the 1960s, 1970s Irish language revival that came along with the folk music revival. Now I could be talking out of my hat, but this is, I think, but this is kind of but there was an amazing writer called Anthony Flaherty. He still is an amazing writer. He writes
I was going to say, I was like, what happened to Anthony?
But in that Anthony went to TV, and film, and I haven't seen a stage play from him, but he wrote 3 amazing Gaeilge, Grost America, Imachtaí na Saoirse, these really good shows that were commissioned by the Abbey and performed in the Abbey, and they were like about how shit it was to grow up in the Gaeltacht in the 70s, or how in the 80s, and there were real kind of real meaty stories, and with a small cast and really good accessible text, and it had the text of the people, in that he had English smattering through it, as it is in the Gaeltacht. That pure Cranachilla language doesn't exist to an extent, so there is kind of there is this thing. So I'd imagine that, to some extent, maybe in the Abbey there's that wanting to pull away from that tradition, but I think there is a need for more than just the Taibhdearc to be somewhere where work can be made in Irish, and like it's independent companies like Moonfish and Branner and Phoebe that are making work, and then there's other companies around the places, making new shows as well. But it seems that a lot of the work that's been made is for young audiences, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I had an experience with a friend of mine who, just on that notion of coming to a show, and should we call it Irish language theatre? And I texted her the details of Star of the Sea back in 2014. Come along if you like. And whether she just didn't read the blurb or she just booked the ticket and was like, yeah, I'll come along. And after the show, she grabbed me and she was like, I didn't know there was going to be Irish in it. I could have killed you. I loved the show. And it was just like side by side, this like really like visceral reaction. She's like, I was going to kill you. Great show. Amazing. I'm going to pass on the word. And so it's really interesting that, like, we can have those reactions, and still really enjoy the show, or still really feel that it's valid. Do you know what I mean? Or so that was a great kind of moment for me, kind of thinking maybe it's not so important that I let people know, hey, just so you know, there is going to be Irish in this, because
it's like what's it, a trigger warning?
Well, I think it like I think I said to you, Aoife, that in Branner, we stopped saying anything about language years ago, because it just ruins it for people. As in, not so much venues. Some venues used to think, okay, immediately we have to apologize to the audience, because how do we say that? How do we sell this? What are we going to do? And then I had an occasion where we had a show that was all in Irish called Clonlair, that was on in the theatre festival in Cologne, and it had sold out in Cologne, and we had said to them, do you want us to put more English into it? What way do you want to do it? And they said, well, we'd like to hear the Irish. We'd like to hear what it sounded like. So what we did was, we normally, in those kind of shows that are all Irish, depending on the audience, we would put in key words in English just to keep the audience moving along. But normally the language is not a necessity, in that it's just one of the layers. So so we put in the keywords in German, and it worked well. But the same show was due to be on at a place in Dublin, I won't say where, and we were asked, could we translate the name of it so people would come to it?
Wow.
And I'm kind of going, no, that's the name, you know. So but it wasn't that it wasn't selling, it was just that they were worried. And I think I think adults have a problem with the language, but children don't yet.
Very
you know.
interesting.
Yeah.
And actually, just to pick up a point about Star of the Sea, so I have an interesting relationship with Star of the Sea because I wasn't in the original production, so I got to see it. I think I was there on the opening night in the Taibhjark when it was, when it opened in the Arts Festival, and it was amazing. And like, of the many things that I loved about the show, one of the things that stood out the most, and there's a great photo there, actually, you can see some of the text on one of the sails at the back of the stage that was used for projecting digital images. So like there were sections of the play, scenes that happened pretty much all through Irish or a bilingual. And the way that Moonfish decided to make it accessible was that if there was a scene happening in Irish, they would then have, like, say, a letter that was written by one of the characters who was in that scene. It would kind of be like a letter writing, oh, I met this person, or maybe a note that he's writing in his notebook, I met this person and we talked about X, Y, and Z. So it wasn't like subtitling word for word, but it was the kind of thing where you could kind of, if you were maybe not very strong with Irish, you could kind of glance up to it and just kind of make sure that you're still following, or you could read it entirely, or you could just ignore it and just watch the physicality of the actors as they were interacting. And like just the way that that Moonfish decided to address the fact that there was going to be Irish in it, but they wanted to make it accessible to everyone was fantastic. Yeah. But then when I joined the production a couple of years later, I was very lucky. I got to join it when we were touring to America, and it was brought to America by a woman who had seen the production in Ireland and decided to buy it in, to tour to. We went to 3 or 4 different venues in the States that were either parts of high schools or universities over there. And she came to see the first show that we did. I think it was in New Hampshire, because it was in her venue. And afterwards she was like, oh, I forgot how much Irish was in it. And like the great thing was that like she'd basically seen the production and experienced it and kind of absorbed the storytelling, not caring what language it was in, and was only reminded a couple of years later when we landed on her doorstep with the show about how much actual Gaeilge was in the show. And it was funny because I think she was starting to kind of freak out because there was so much Irish in it, forgetting the fact that she had loved it and had no problem in following the story when she had seen it.
And you hadn't changed in any way.
We hadn't changed anything, like, really, yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of like, it's something that it maybe is an issue because people have an issue with the language. Like, for example, say Zita's friend, possibly feeling that she'd been tricked into coming to see an Irish language or partially Irish language show, when in fact that wasn't the intention. Yeah. Sometimes I actually mentioned one of Branner's shows when I was talking to you, Aoife, about one of the shows I might talk about. And I said to you in the email that I couldn't remember if it was in English or in Irish, or in fact, if there were any words in it at all, because I could kind of remember experiencing the story. And that's the thing that stands out. It doesn't really matter what language it's in.
Success.
But I think that like I had mentioned Star of the Sea is one of the shows that I would like to talk about, because I am, we kind of, Moonfish make their work in Branner, and we kind of a lot of the performers will work between the two companies. But I remember seeing it, and I had, obviously gone to see all of the shows that the guys had made, but I thought that this was a really successful transition into how they managed to use subtitles or surtitles, because they've used different versions of it where there was like text running above the screen being projected, or above the stage projected. There was different versions of subtitle and surtitling. And I think what they achieved in this was the perfect balance, because what I think can really put people who speak one of the languages off is if it's been repeated in some way to them. It puts you off the story. So like if you're if you're able to speak Irish, you should be able to watch that show that way. But if it's been subtitled in some way, then it's doubled for you, and you kind of go, I know, come on, move on, So I think, and that's why we kind of try and do that as well, in that we never repeat what's been said. It should move the story on. And I think that, when you go to and need some of the shows where you have the person speaking at the same time, and all around the audience, all you can hear is, I am doing something different to the actor now. And you're kind of going, at least get the person who's doing the voiceover to do it in the same way as the actor is speaking it, so you're not ruining the show for the person who has the Clúisíní in. So,
but aren't they done live, Mark?
Oh,
aren't those live translations? How can the actor be on stage and also translating themselves?
No, there's somebody downstairs reading the script for everybody.
They should kind of like do the same voice.
Oh, okay, right.
They should put some performance into it.
Okay, I get you.
It's like reading listening to a really bad audiobook while watch something happening on stage. It's like,
yes,
because I've just tried them a few, because I think I used to go to see shows at international festivals, because the work for children is quite an international area to work in, because language isn't really an issue. You can tour any language.
They have children all over the world, I believe.
I think children are everywhere. Yeah. And it's really good. And people used to bring them to see shows, which really helped. But you go and see a show in a language, and you wouldn't really know. You'd kind of, they might translate the title of the show, and you'd have to try and figure it out. But most of the times you could. But it was a real interesting learning curve for me to see that, okay, well, if I make this, like I saw some Danish shows that were kind of impenetrable, and I went, okay, well, obviously this is going to be impenetrable for children if I'm speaking all in Irish without showing them any help, or without telling them the story in another way. So it became a kind of an obsession with us, is to find how many ways within that scene can we tell the story. Can we use the music? Can we use the movement? Can we use some objects, and then language? And that we kind of, so it is something that I think that we, like Seán was saying, it is something that I would like it just to be called theatre, and it's because sometimes there's an apologia, and also from the makers as well. Like when I remember I've only ever acted in English once. I've never done a show other than in Irish, and the shows that I got a chance to act in Branner, they were silent mostly, or else in Irish. So but from working like in shows years ago in the Taibhirk or whatever, there was always that kind of I wonder, will anyone come, and you can go, and that it's because it's in Irish that you're wondering that. It's not like because the show isn't good or we haven't worked as hard as everyone else, So it's a really interesting space, and maybe it's something got to do with the colonial attitude to the language, or is there a hang up from, are we good enough, kind of thing.
Big time.
Yeah.
Mm.
God, this is getting
And I
deep,
think,
isn't it?
Mark, yeah. but like within that, Mark, I think something Branner does, which is something you mentioned, it's like you're kind of pulling at all these different aspects of telling a story. That languages kind of become like the music, it's like it's a bit like, will we use the viola? No, we'll use the cello, and then actually we're going to bring the trombone. It's like that it becomes less important about I don't know,
the words.
The words become it's like stepping into another space of storytelling, and so that you can really experience the heart of that story, in whatever way kind of makes sense to you as well. It's, even in children's theatre, I think that's really important.
And the perfect example kind of that jumps out to me of that in one of your shows, Mark, I think it was Blah, for the Arts Festival. I went along to it and I was feeling really bad because I was like, this is kind of a show for kids. Everyone here is either a child or a parent or an aunt or an uncle or something, but I'm sitting there on my own, this beardy 30-something man going, oh God. But I love the show. But there was one moment where like the story starts to take a bit of a turn, and I think Brian have worked a couple of times with Colin McAnummer and his music, right?
Yeah, this is
His
our first
music
time to work with him. Yeah.
Was that his first time? The first time,
Yeah.
okay. His music is phenomenal, and it like there was a moment where things started to go kind of, you know, turn a little bit dark, and that was really reflected in the music. And there was a child who was sitting beside his mother, beside me, who turned to his mother, and I heard him say, "I don't like this," because he had totally picked up on the atmosphere. And
Yeah.
so, like, I don't know whether that child spoke any Irish or not, or you know, if he we're so open to picking up story and cues through all different kinds of levels that I think
Yeah.
the kind of the language that the text is spoken in, especially in theatre like Marc's, Branner's, that's so multi-layered. It should the language, whatever language it is that's spoken, should not be a reason for people not to go and experience it, because it's beautiful. And like, I've been lucky enough to work with some phenomenal artists in theatre, either for kids or for grown-ups or whatever. And these are the kind of people that work with Moonfish and with Branner all the time, people who are like fantastic physical theatre actors or fantastic musicians. And like, if you go to see a Branner show or a Moonfish show, what you're seeing is people who are like at the very top of their game, and the fact that the show happens to be in Irish or partially in Irish is just an addendum. But like, the artists are as good as anything. Like, you know, some of them are just phenomenal, and the shows are brilliant.
Well, thanks, Seán.
I might just show some of the photos from and I was saying to the gang before we started, I'm very aware that I might mess up pronunciation, but we might have a look at Aoife of Nanálaigh, and before Seán has to run away.
Oh, yes.
And maybe as I share this screen, I'm kind of curious, some of the things that you're talking about in terms of the layers of craft that are at work at so many times in so many of these pieces. It kind of makes me wonder, not to throw shade on anyone who's not an Irish language performer, but have you found a different kind of performer, a different kind of maker, whether they're a performer or otherwise, working the Irish language? Is there a way in which people have more strings to their bow in order to make this thing?
I don't know. I don't think it's, I think it's not necessarily the fact that it's in Irish. I think the fact is that, for us anyway, it's because it's for an audience of children. And again, I don't want to throw shade on anyone either, but I think that the most imaginative and creative productions that I've ever seen have been for children. And because the fact is, I think that sometimes when you create work for adults, you can make assumptions to their understanding of things. You can make assumptions to, they're going to get the context, they're going to get the subtext, and we don't have to work as hard. But when you make work for children, you have to make sure that every moment is valid and every moment is something that's really special. So it just adds to our kind of creative challenge if we have to add in other languages. And like, when we do, like in Aoife Spillane-Hinks, it's in Irish, there's Catalan in it, there's some French in it, and English. And what I always try and do is, if we use Irish, we'll use other European languages, because let's put it there as a European language. And so all languages are used. And so that there's nobody kind of going, oh, there's Irish in that. But people always come out and say, oh, there's Irish in it. And I go, yeah, and there was Catalan. Do you hear that? Or there was Spanish, you know, so like we have a show that we did, which is for kind of like 2 to 6 years old, and it's in Irish and in Catalan, no other language. And that show has toured all around Ireland. It did 2 weeks in the South Bank Centre in London. It was all over France, all over Spain, and we never translated it once. And nobody kind of went, what's that language? Or like, some people kind of went, what was that language you were speaking? But there was no kind of, oh God, what language is that? Is it Irish? You know, so it's kind of, we do kind of get to go under the radar a bit, but also the challenge is to make something that is like really vivid and really creative, because a child will come at a show, and they won't choose to go to that show. They'll be brought to that show. So you have to find as many ways in for them as possible, and that's where the work gets interesting. You have to allow for all the different intelligences. You even have to allow for the fact that they mightn't have had breakfast, or they might have been given out on the bus, or the teacher might be really strict, or or they might have had a row in the car with mom and dad. And you have to realize that all this baggage is coming to your venue, and you have to try and find a way to let them live in that little change into this world. So we spend as much time with the composers creating the pre-show music as we do creating the rest of the music, because you have to bring them into where you want them to be, so they're in a place to watch it. So I talked a lot about, I don't know if that answers your question.
It was wonderful. I think you did.
And just as an example of what I was saying, like looking through the photos there of Aoife Spillane-Hinks, there are at least 2 or 3 Jacques Lecoq trained actors in that show who added to, like, there are some beautiful physical moments in it. There's one, Jonathan Gunning, and like there are, from my memory anyway, there's like beautiful singing in harmony and live music playing, and it's just like it was such a beautiful show. And I suppose I was kind of particularly taken by it because I saw it on, like, I think it was the last night of the last day of one of your runs on like the 22nd of December, and I'd been working up to that point, so I hadn't experienced any kind of Christmas build up at all because I was busy working. The first day that I wasn't working, I got in to see a matinee of Aoife Spillane-Hinks, and it was like, bing, it's Christmas, just like that, because of the atmosphere and the magic in it and just the wonder, and it was brilliant. And what I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to go TV and pause the match, because I don't want to leave the chat, if that's all right. So come back.
Yeah, great.
Pause it so I can watch it.
Nobody
tell me what the score is, okay? I don't want to know what the score is.
Do you know what? It's like we're going to have to getting you to stay for another pint.
It's the closest to that any of us can get right now.
Yeah, this is the equivalent.
So good.
I kind of had a secret hope that we would kind of seduce him into staying for the last minute. So
it was Aoife, it was totally always going to happen.
Yeah,
always going to happen.
It had to. That idea that Seán was talking about there is so great, because what I think is, especially with children's theatre, and I think, Marc, with Branagh, it happens so naturally, is the playfulness with ideas, and not really shutting ideas out because, we can't really do that, like, but she already spoke Irish there, so maybe we shouldn't speak Irish again. There's just this idea of like, let's play with all these moments, or play with like the fact that we have English and Irish sitting side by side, and then we have the music, and then we have this other language, Catalan and Italian and French. But it's really a sense of play, and then we have the story that we can play with as well. And I think that's what's electric about that style of theatre, is that it really just grabs you and said, just come with us. Don't worry about it. We're going to bring you somewhere. And you do also kind of mind the audience. And especially because it's, especially with children's theatre, like what you're saying, it's like preparing and then like landing in and then going, no, we're going to go here together. And even the actors are going there, which is what I love about Branagh shows. The actors are going there too, and you can really get that sense when you're sitting in the audience.
Yeah, that's brilliant. But I think like it's so important, but again, it's a responsibility that you have when you work with children, because it might be their first ever show, it might be their last ever show, and you need to make sure that it is something that they'll remember, and so every show has to be equally as good. We don't do we don't do previews, because you can't tell a child you're going to see a preview because
Imagine a kid coming out.
It's not going to be as good as tomorrow. Why don't we go tomorrow? It's like, so it has to be, there's no like that, like we do take a long time to make the shows, but it's because that once it hits an audience, it has to be perfect, but I think that there is innovation in the Irish language. I think there's way more innovation in theatre for young audiences than there is in theatre for adults, and theatre for adults are only catching up with us. European wide, the work that's been made is phenomenal. And then you see somebody taking on one element of that for a show for adults, and people are going, it's amazing. I don't know how they did it, but it's fantastic. And you go, yeah, no, I saw that. Somebody did that, and they used 4 different ways of that in one show. But I think that what is interesting is there's a move in a way away from text-based theatre, and to a certain extent there's an evolution of text-based theatre. It's not people, because audiences are changing, and I think children are changing quicker than adults. So children won't sit there and let you say 20 lines of text, because it better be amazing, so adults will sit there and kind of go, oh God, I'm so bored, but they won't kind of go, what are you saying? Whereas kids will shout at you, and so I think, but to a certain extent, those kids are growing up now, and they're going to be our audience as adults, and they won't sit for that length. And I think there is, like, you look at Broken Talkers, and you look at Anu's work, where it's, it's vivid, and it's not, it's not that kind of literary based style anymore that's in vogue. So I think that's interesting. But to a certain extent, what's wrong in Irish language theatre is that there is this kind of there in say traditional sectors, there is this idea of, well, we need to get to that stage, but that stage that they want to get to is possibly 10 years ago. I think that there is a need to, like, but Phoebe are doing this. Phoebe are looking at different ways to make work in different contexts. And I think that they're making some really interesting choices in the way that they're making their work. To be fair to them, the show they did in the cars, it was a really interesting concept, and it was almost like a marriage of a drive-in theater with theater and film, like a live film to a certain extent.
Yeah, and another example of like, it was, like you said, a combination of all those different elements, and it was like a drive-in movie is good fun, but the fact that you kind of add on the element of it being also a live performance, where things can go wrong, or it's actually happening live in front of you. If you want to kind of take your eyes away from the screen, you can see the actors in the cars on the kind of elevated platforms right in front of you. Like you were saying, Mark, like Phoebe are definitely making very sort of bold choices in trying to do different shows. Another example would be the production of Mac on Vaha that they did, which is an Irish language production of the Scottish play, in which I'd say they probably trimmed the text down to a quarter of the length of what the text was, because it was more about the experience. It was like a kind of a punk rock setting for the Scottish play, which had like a live punk rock band, and like there were bits that were sung. It was amazing. The images there actually kind of give a good example or sample of the kind of atmosphere of the thing, and it was great. Like it was experienced in the round. So they kind of constructed. It was in like kind of a hall, a community hall that you'd find in any parish in Ireland, but they constructed scaffolding around the periphery of it. So the audience were on 2 levels around the outside. You see there, perfect example. The audience were on the lower and the upper level, as far as I remember, watching the show that kind of happened on the floor in between them. And it was great, really, really good.
Yeah, and I think that Darach McAnumra as well has made some really interesting stuff out in the factories in Connemara. Like there's spaces in Connemara that you would, if they were in the city centre in Dublin, you died for, and people would be trying to every show would want to be made for it, and I think Darach has made 2 shows in one of these factories, and one that was a Galway 2020 piece, which again had loads of different languages in it. Oh, I'm so bad now, I can't think of the name of it. The first one was called Aisling.
Yeah, I saw Aisling, but I didn't see the second one.
The second one, I can't think of the name of it, but it was, again, he had Basque performers, and there was Scots Gaelic, and there was an Irish as well. But again, it was a multidisciplinary piece of storytelling. So there was Scots Gaelic, or there was a beautiful, like the most amazing dancer from the Basque country who danced to Liam O'Wanley singing shannos and playing the piano, and like so they're really interesting, and a lot of the fact that as well is that a lot of the work is originated from the west of Ireland, and in Ireland, unfortunately, unless it's in Dublin, nobody, the newspapers don't come to review anymore because they don't have those budgets. So it's so hard for people to get to here. And even we were talking about earlier about older productions not having good photographs, but now if you don't have a good photograph, nobody's going to know you did it. And so there's kind of, I think that the fact that there's so much, there's really cool stuff happening that only happens once, and it's kind of like this. Did you see it? I don't know.
A production that was like that, and even for me, just looking at the photos, it was kind of narcotic, and it really felt like something I missed out on. And I think there were only maybe 2 performances. Was self-conscious again. Star na Gaeltach.
Yeah.
And
that was another Phoebe production, and like you said, I think there were only two performances of it, which, like, on one hand is amazing because you're like, okay, if you're in the small group of people who get to see it, it's great. It's a very personal kind of thing, but it's also like you're kind of going, geez, like so many people should see this show. The amount of work that went into it. So they basically video mapped. It was kind of like the multidisciplinary in the like the shows that Darth McAnumra directed more recently that Marc was talking about, like, because there was a choir, Cor Sharg, I think it was, who were like a probably internationally renowned choir who performed some singing as well as actors, and video mapping that was projected onto the wall of a quarry out in Connemara. So and they basically kind of tell the story of the Celts. And it was another one of those kind of experiential things. I think it was about 9 or 10 years ago or something, or when they did it. And like, it was just a really, really magical experience. I kind of tapping into the emotions. Now I might be getting this totally wrong, but as far as I remember, one of the songs the choir sang is a song that like is really connected to emigration, and it just like kind of really powerfully plucked at the heartstrings as you were watching it. Yeah, that's a kind of.
But like the site, even that I didn't get to see it, but I have heard, all about it. But I think that Phoebe do, I think they reached the I thought that they really got it right with that film that they made for Saulu for TG Cahir, based on all of the different things that happened during, was it part of they filmed it in Roundstone, and Philip Doherty wrote the script for it. It was just a beautiful piece. Tommy Tiernan was it was like a Dylan Thomas under Milkwood kind of film, where he kind of talked about all of these people that had made work during the pandemic, and they all based in this little village, and they were singing in windows, bands playing in windows. It was just I was blown away by it, and I thought they really nailed it with that. Saulu, I think it's still on the TG Car player if you get a chance to see it. Tommy Tiernan is brilliant, just walking through the town saying this poem, and every time he'd stop for chips, and it's what's his name singing, giving him the chips. It was class. If you get a chance, have a look at it.
It's still on my list. I haven't seen it yet.
I feel like really, really kind of what I always kind of the sense I get from Phoebe is like they make these brave and bold decisions, and things feel epic. But what they really kind of capture is the heart of things as well. So it's like there's this kind of I don't know, beautiful texture that they always have with their work, even when it's like, I remember seeing Star na Gaeltach and kind of going like, wow, but still really being able to emotionally connect with the small parts of the small parts of things that were happening,
and like they used to be, like they began 2 years after Branner, and I remember them coming with this show in the Tyviark during Babro, which was a puppet show, a puppet piece, like puppet Marcin, and and it was just something that it was like seeing Jim Henson in Irish, and you kind of go, look at that, like, that, but and they stuck with that kind of style for a while, but it seems now that everything that they do is completely different to the last thing that they've done.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. It has its pros and its cons, but it's always interesting,
Exactly, yeah. Like, and I've been involved in a couple of productions with Phoebe, and like there's one in particular that stands out because I just knew that it was like a really unique experience that people would get if they came to see it. I couldn't guarantee that they would like it, but like they're not going to be bored and they're not going to feel like it was just kind of meh. So they're going to have a strong response to it one way or the other. It was a production called Setanta. So it was based upon the legend of Setanta and Ferdia and like how Setanta became a warrior and whatever. But like the entire thing was set in modern times in the world of wrestling. So all of the battles were represented in the form of WWF style wrestling matches. And I think there were 5 actors, and we performed it with these kind of latex masks that you saw popping up there. And there were bits that were pre-recorded in advance that were projected onto a screen at the back of the stage while other things were happening sort of live downstage. And it was just like, it was so bold. And I think that's a word that definitely I could associate with Phoebe. Like as Zita said, they really just make bold choices. And like, I can kind of get on board with any production that just goes for it. Whatever they want to do, they go for it. And either they fail or they succeed. But like the idea of kind of just being safe, or even trying to, say, right, well, we're doing the show in Irish, let's try to emulate something that exists in English. I don't think Phoebe have ever bothered doing that.
I think that worked really well because of Paul Mercier's energy in it as well. Like, I'll never forget, seeing, I remember being at home in Kildare and stumbling into stumbling upon the Paul Mercier's version of Tóriach Diarmuid and Grania. With it's set in crime in Gangland, Dublin.
Pursuit.
And it was Pursuit. Oh my God, I loved it. Like, David Pearce was in it. It was like Mr. King, and Grania, your dad wants you. It was like the whole story, but it was set in Dublin, and I kind of got that sense from Setanta. I got a good sense of that style of the Passion Machine style, that energy, and that everybody's working constantly in the production kind of thing, which really helped the Setanta piece. Jeez, you worked hard in Setanta. I was wrecked watching you. Like, when you see actors and they're genuinely dripping in sweat, and at the end of the show they can barely bow.
That was great crack. We were so fit.
That's a great show.
They've worked hard, or else done something really wrong, and they've been catching up all the way through.
We're at 8 p.m.
Okay.
Which is like, how could we possibly have gotten there already? And I wondered, this is totally indulging myself from having read the words that one of you wrote about this show and looking at the photos. And it's a very different energy to what we've just been talking about, this kind of exuberant bigness, boldness of Phoebe. Was Zita a play or a piece that you mentioned called Klacha?
Yes. Okay. So Klacha was performed, or was produced by Brew Theatre, and so acted and created by James Reardon. I think it premiered in the Galway Theatre Festival in 2018, and in Katie's Cottage in the Claddagh in Galway. And just, this piece, so going from Phoebe to Klacha is like, they're wildly different, but I think there's this core kind of similarity actually in a way. But in that the whole piece is it's full mask, so performed by Philippa Hamley, and it's about a woman who's waiting. Her husband has gone to sea, and she's waiting for him to come home. And you don't hear, so there's no dialogue, there's no spoken word. The only words you hear are sung, and it's Seán singing from Mclaughlin. And so it's just this really quiet, like delicate space, I would say. And you're just sitting with this woman waiting for her husband to come home. And this was, I think it's such a powerful way to engage with Irish. And kind of for me, it was a way to kind of engage with, again, like an experiential kind of experience of theatre, where you're kind of sitting with it. And the things that happen in it are very small, but a story does happen, you know. And I think what's incredible about this is that the understanding you get from it isn't necessarily cognitive. You know, you're not really thinking. Yeah, you are at moments thinking, oh, maybe this is happening. And did she look over there because is he coming? And what's happening now? But really, I think it's this sense of you're entering into a space of her culture. And when this Seán singing comes out, there was this moment for me where I went, of course it's Seán. Of course she thinks in Irish. Of course her world is filled with the Irish language. And it was just a really gentle way to kind of let that wash over you, let the language wash over you, let the music wash over you. And so I think you kind of come away, well, I certainly did kind of come away kind of going, there's a richness in the silence and in and in kind of the small minute details of that of the performance.
But it was the fact that it was in a cottage, the turf fire was lighting, and like Caithfidh Mclaughlin was singing live, but she was in the loft, so you could never see her, you just heard her sing, and it was like shivers down your spine. But what I thought, they used the Mas Lavar, which really kind of gave it this universality. You could have been in any coastal village, and she could have been singing fado, or you know, it could have been any any story anywhere. But you're just sitting here, and it would have been valid if that singer sung, you know, any traditional song in any language. But it just really. It really worked. Yeah, I agree with you there, Zita. I feel like we're on House of the Year or something.
Yeah. But and I think if someone had started singing opera, I would have gone, of course her word is opera. Of course it is. Yeah. Because it just felt like you were kind of invited to sit with her. And whatever kind of, and so that's really interesting, Marc, what you're saying there about it.
But I think that's the beauty of shows. I'm fascinated by shows with no language, because if you give people the right signals, people already are going to be creating their own internal narrative as they're watching, and as they're walking in the room, they're going, okay, I know what this is about. But once you give them the right signals and point them the right direction, they can have their own version of your story that you want them to tell. But I think once you create the experience and it's rich enough, it clicks with them, and you can't be wrong. So I think that no language is an amazing way to speak to an audience as well.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly mention Diarmuid de Fríocha, if you don't mind, because Diarmuid de Fríocha has been in everything that has been done in Irish language. You know, he's worked everywhere, but from they had a really exciting company called the Fauna, they're kind of like this. It's like the Grateful Dead, you know, that sort of. Have you seen the Fauna? It's like it's like that sort of a. And the guys who all worked in the Fauna have all stayed working in theatre or TV to some extent. But Diarmuid did a show based on the life of Pádraig Ó Conradh, and did it in the town hall in Galway. I couldn't believe it so long ago. It was more than 13 years ago. 2001 he did it, and I always remember him just becoming Pádraig Ó Conradh, and it was a one-man show, and it was in Irish, and there was some English in it, I think. I'm not actually sure, but there was a couple of languages in it, but it was a like a tour de force. It was a beautiful piece of theatre, and I think the only set was a table and a couple of chairs, and he really kind of brought this. In some way, he's kind of like Pádraig Ó Conradh is this. He's kind of like Brendan Behan in the sense of the life that he had and the language that the stories that he wrote, but and there was a sadness to his real life, and then there was an amazing literary ability. But Diarmuid really brought across who this guy really was, you know, and they reimagined it again in a few years later. But you know, Diarmuid was working with Paul Brennan for a while with Puck Productions, and he made a brilliant piece about a drag artist, which was in Irish as well, and was Mike used to program all of these shows upstairs in the studio in the town hall, and he, you know, they made some amazing stuff. And I remember being in the Axis actually years and years ago, watching Diarmuid and Lara Campbell do Paris, Texas in Irish, and it was in the round, and you come in and you sat and you were in like a viewing booth and watched them do the show in the center of the stage, and you had a viewing booth, and you had a little red light on beside you. It was just like an amazing thing, and I think it was in Irish. I'm sure
they did productions in both languages. So I think
in both languages.
Originally did it in English, but they also did an Irish language version. I think they were running them side by side.
Yeah.
Or maybe at the same time they would do a couple of shows a day, and one of them would be as Gaeilge and the other ones would be in English or something like that. I actually never saw it, but it's one of those legendary shows that you go, oh, I wish I'd seen that.
Yeah. So like there was a period there at the beginning of the 2000s in Galway. There was even an Irish language festival called Féile Cá Bhíle, and that's when I started to perform in Irish in Galway. But there was when Darach McNummer was in the Taivark, he started these schemes called Scálaí Sauna and Fuaidar Fiabhra. And Scálaí Sauna was like they were writing schemes, but he got writers to bring text or bring shows, and then basically what we had was he assigned a director and a cast, and you got your script on the Sunday, you had a full week in the Taivark, and the following Sunday you performed it. And we did 4 shows in February and 4 shows in November, and it was like an amazing way to get a whole crop of new scripts, a whole crop of new actors, and like every Sunday night the place was full for a month. So there were 4 in a row, and like it was, you know, initiatives like that really kind of brought a new energy to and at the same time TG Carr was bedding in. They were there since '95, and so there was that sort of an energy around Galway with young Irish speakers and seeing different opportunities. But unfortunately, that kind of energy has waned, and I think there's room now for for that sort of energy again to really kind of reinvigorate the types of texts that are being created, and like Roxanna Gleam there's a whole generation of Irish speakers that don't even know what the Gaeltacht looks like or Irish from a Gaeltacht mouth sounds like. So and you know, they have a valid existence as well that I haven't seen on stage. So I think to a certain extent we're very romantic in the programming of Irish work, and I think there's a need for those voices, and fair play to her for making that piece, because you know it's her experience of the language, and people who go to Gael School. I remember doing my thesis in college in '96 or something, and it was about the growth of Gael schools, and you know how in 1972 there was 2, and in 1996 there was like 200. But I'd say now there must be at least 500 or 600. So there's a huge population of people who have done all of their learning through Irish, and who might just want to see if they could be on stage, you know, as in like see their lives on stage.
Yes, yeah.
Or
And
like,
that is so important, isn't it? That I think in theatre in general, if it exists, I personally believe theatre should mirror it. And we should be seeing all aspects of our culture in Ireland now, the ever-growing culture. And on stage, we should be kind of grappling with lots of the difficult and complex questions, and the big and the bold ones, as well. So I think that's so important that we see and we hear all of these stories.
It comes down to sorry, Seán, go
on. No, I was going to say, and that there should be more Irish language theatre available to people, like the kind of, the number of opportunities that one gets to go and see an Irish language production in, I'm living in Dublin at the moment, like they're so small in comparison to, shows that are on in other languages. And like, I think that's one thing that a lot of people who say, I would meet a lot of people who would be like, oh, my Irish was good in school, but I haven't, it's very rusty now, or I'd love to learn Irish or whatever. And the people who say they want to learn Irish or relearn Irish, I kind of say to them, that even more important than finding lessons that they can take is to find somewhere that they can use it frequently.
Yeah.
And like I'm lucky enough that, I started playing Gaelic football when I moved to Dublin with a team that does all the training and stuff at Gaeilge. And it's brilliant because there's a ready-made community of people that you can speak Irish with, whatever, 2 or 3 days a week at training or at matches. And that's brilliant. But like, if I was to be relying only on theatrical experiences, like, I don't know, what would there be, 3 or 4 different events per year that I could go to? And we definitely have to get that number up. And like, I think based upon everything that we've said up until now, how dynamic and how wide-ranging Irish language productions in theatre are, there's no reason why we can't.
Yeah. And like, we kind of have gone straight from Galway across to Dublin, but there's also work existing down in Cork. There's stuff happening up in Donegal. I think, Seán, you mentioned Brendan Galley, and there's in Carradrum-Aroshk, Manor Hamilton. That's there's Prunchies, Prino Daignan. They have a little company there, and you have Russell Snoddiger are there as well, and then Moncon McGann is making work that's really interesting as well. So like there's all these different pockets of work happening, but I think what it comes down to is that and again it's a symptom of the state's support or non-support, or maybe we like Irish, maybe we don't, kind of this wishy-washy support of the language, that there's not so the work the work is so sparse, and a lot of times are not the production value that you'd like it to be, because the funding isn't there, and because there isn't the commitment to, the Taibhart get a certain amount of funding, but a lot of that funding goes to keeping a really old building running and alive. So I think that there needs to be a commitment to work being created, and I think the Abbey have work to do on that. I think like the Axis have been doing a lot of work, and the Axis have been the go-to place for Irish language work for a long. Like, we've brought lots of shows. I remember bringing, when we were in Taibhart, myself and Dara Devani were in on Bale Bucht, and I remember going to Ballymun to do it. And when we were doing a show on the Taibhart back then, we'd go, I wonder will we get to go to Ballymun with it, and it was cool because that was our only way to get a show in Dublin. And a lot of times people didn't know what happened unless it was in Dublin. You could have done the run of your life in Taibhart, and it could have been like the most amazing show that ever existed. And yet, unless it was in Dublin, it wouldn't get into the national media or whatever. And then also you get the chance to have the hardcores come at it and say, I don't know about the Irish and that, the grammar was off there a bit, but you'll have them. And I think there should be, there should be shows for them people that are grammatically perfect, spoken in the dialect that they'd like it to be in. And then there should be shows for people who want to go and see a good theatre show that happens to be in another language. But that won't happen without funding.
There are people like that in all theatres, languages, because you've got people who go and see Shakespeare with the script open in front of them, and you kind of think, oh my God, the pressure on the actors that they're reading the script along while watching the production. Alison Martin has an interesting comment there. Should it be more heavily subsidised then to drive the audience numbers and then have repeat attendees? And I think that's a good idea. Like, I think that combined with like just saying, I don't know, for example, take the Abbey and say, the Abbey are going to do 2 productions as Gaeilge, even if it's just for a week, on the main stage per year. What happens then is you've got writers going, oh my God, I could write a play that's going to be on the main stage of the Abbey. So it encourages Irish language writers to not going to go, okay, I'm going to write a play and this one is going to be on the main stage of the Abbey, but going to go, right, I'll write a play as Gaeilge, we'll put it on in Smock Alley for a week and see what kind of response I get to my writing, and then develop on that, and then hopefully one day my show will be on in the Abbey. So it's like if a platform was provided, I think it would inspire the artists. Like, I don't think at the moment there are a lot of platforms like for Irish language writers. Most of the work that I do is script writing for Russ Naroon. That's something where I can okay, I know this is this is an income, this is something that's going to be produced. Whereas if I was to sit down and write a script, ask Gaeilge, I'd be kind of going, well, I am doing it at the moment, but I'm kind of wondering, where could it end up? Is there an opportunity for it? And if it's not for young people, then we're kind of ruling out Branner and a couple of other companies and stuff. So the opportunities or the avenues that could take this piece of writing are limited. So I think if you open up those avenues, you encourage people to walk down those avenues. I don't know if that's a metaphor that works.
You also open up the ability for it to be dramaturged, and for it to be torn apart, and for it to be put back together, and for then the accessibility to be there, and for the audience, for the audience. Like, a lot of times, and I'll say this about shows in English as well, a lot of times I'll go and see a show and I know that nobody once within that whole rehearsal period thought about me, the audience. They were thinking about what would the director want, what did the writer want me to do here, but without and ignoring the fact that there actually is people here you have to entertain. And shows would happen if I wasn't there. That sort of way. When you get the feeling, you kind of go, they don't care if I'm here. What's going on? But I think that that there is a lot of work to be done to make really quality work in Irish. But I think we're not. I think though as well, Alison's point there about heavily subsidized. I think as soon as you mention that, people go, for God's sake, and more money for the Irish language. As soon as Irish language is mentioned, there's a lot, and it's in mainstream media more so than anywhere else, that will print somebody who just wants to rattle on about how useless the language is. And I think that what would be more important is that we start to make quality investment in artists who can make good work, and that they want to make that work in Irish or bilingually, but then that work gets an opportunity to be presented, and then we pull an audience to us rather than driving an audience to something that an audience wants to come and see a piece of work. But again, it means that it has to be on in the project, and it has to be on in the Abbey, and it has to be on during the Galway Arts Festival or during the Dublin Theatre Festival, and not as a tick box, but as a we got money from Force na Gaeilge, what are we going to put in here? It has to be that it needs to be there. Do you know what I mean? And I would say that Force na Gaeilge were the first people to ever believe in Branner before we ever got funding from anyone else. And Deirdre Davitt in Force na Gaeilge has done more work for the Irish language and Irish language theatre than any person alive. She did so much work with Niamh in the Axis. She did with us, with Phoebe. She supported work. She saw the potential, and Deirdre has a background in theatre as well, but she understood how theatre can make a difference. And I think that's missing now. It's really evident that Deirdre's not in Force na Gaeilge, but Force na Gaeilge is still support work to be made, which is really important. I think more work could be supported, because the arts are a way in which a language can be accessed, and also be, as Seán said, be a way of inclusion. So I think that if there is more opportunities for the development of artists, the work will come. But we're not talking it's going to be 2022. This is for 2030. And we get there incrementally, and our audience will be building, because Branner hopefully will still be making work for them. Even though all our work isn't in Irish, we're bilingual. We kind of guerrilla attack people we use guerrilla Irish tactics, where they come along thinking they're going to see a show that has an English language name and there's Irish in it, and and they kind of go, oof, but they generally don't leave. So we're okay. It's more so. I remember I tell you the story. I remember being at a festival and a teacher coming up and saying, "Is this in Irish?" And I said, it is, yeah. It's called Clonlair. There. And she said, well, mine don't have good Irish. And I said, oh, I'd say they'd be fine. Don't worry. And she goes, oh, can you do it in English first? And I went, oh, yeah, okay, we will. No problem. And she sat down and I thought she had won, like, okay, great, he's going to do it in English. Fine. So we sat down and watched it. And we watched the show, and I wasn't performing, but the guys started the show, and it started, and they started speaking in Irish. And she found me and looked around and gave me the dirtiest look. And then after the show, I made a point of talking to the audience and asking them to tell me what they saw and what they heard and what they were thinking and what they, to give me some, to let me see that had they followed the narrative. And they did completely. And I said, there's people here that think you don't have good Irish. Imagine that. Just kind of, because, like, it's that we just need to get past. It's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's so powerful, Mark, in all walks of life, and in particularly when we're talking about this, it's like there's just these things that sometimes we can't really put them aside. We kind of have to go through them a bit and go, yeah, you might think that you have bad Irish, or that this class don't speak good Irish, but there's a wealth of understanding there, and that it's just kind of like pushing into that a bit, isn't it?
Like, I think what a missed opportunity for children if, throughout their education system, that they don't understand the richness. And that was kind of the reason we wanted to make Seán the Changa, is that they don't actually understand the key that is in that An agus Bara book. Those little simple words there are going to open a door to something that has been spoken on this island for 3 or maybe 4 or 5,000 years. And you can have that key, and it's not going to hurt you. It might seem like it's the most horrible thing in the world, but if you just stick with it, nobody expects you to be fluent. We just want you to, like, the way I say it, look at it, is we would absolutely be out with our placards and punching builders if they start to knock down a castle. Yet every day we allow people to destroy our language in the media, with little comments like, sure, what good is that? And it's older than anything on this. It's as old as the island, yet we don't treat it as a piece of heritage. We treat it as this thing that's going to be, why would we do that? And I think once we get past, if we start to equate the language with our heritage and with who we are as a people, and give it the same respect as an archaeological dig, I think that then we're getting somewhere. Like, if you go to build something and it's near somewhere that's a site that could have been ancient in some way, you have to pay for the archaeological dig. Yet you have the access to the archaeology in the words, like we're talking about Cranachilla. It's fantastic. Yet we ignore it, and it's there. You can use it in your mouth. You can use it every day.
Well, and it's a point that's been made this evening, and as has also been mentioned this evening, Roxanne Mclaughlin is working with it in the piece that's been released this week. It's not just it's not just eating your broccoli kind of heritage, isn't it? It's not just about, oh, it's important, let's make sure it doesn't die because that would be bad. It's this extraordinary headspace and way in which one's mind and experience of the world can be shaped because you have certain words or phrases that just are not translatable. And so you have a room in which to live that isn't translatable into English or another language. I mean, that's so valuable.
Well, like, it's kind of like the state for years, you had to respect fairy forts, and you couldn't build on them or knock them down. But that started to change. The planning law changed sometimes around the middle 2000s when we started to build on anything. But that was the first break from that link between this. I wouldn't touch it. I don't know why. Just don't break it. There could be something there, and that's what the Irish language is like. With the Irish language, there's this like fluid boundary between the mystical and the reality. And that's something that that's just accepted in in terms of phrases, and that's there. But English, and especially the bastard English that we speak, it's a version of Irish, and a version of what we hear from Coronation Street, and a version of, now more so, what we hear from YouTube. But it's a version of us, but still, it's like it's like something that's not real, but then so it's funny. It's a funny thing to explain to somebody. Speak that language and you'll understand it a little bit more.
Yes.
This is just, I mean, I could sit here all night, and it's, I mean, there's
Imagine what it'd be like if we had a few pints and we're sitting around it.
Seán would never get to see that.
When everything opens up again, I think we should have Zoom pints, but actually, like, this would happen in a pub, and everyone else could be at home and have their pints. I think it'd be a class. Right? I'm putting that forward. Somebody second the motion.
I will. A second.
Oh, sorry. I just have to read out Alison Martin's commentary, and there are some comments. The conversation has been so dense that's just been coming out of the three of you that I thought it would be sacrilege to try to crowbar in the wonderful things that people have said in the comments. But Alison says, it certainly was the case that certain newspapers won't use Irish words because it used to cost more to print with fadas. And
oh my God.
And again, I mean, why am I even reading Alison's wonderful comment? Because it will definitely open another can of worms. But it's what
our health system can't deal with fadas.
Irish Rail
can't deal with fadas. Yet in every European country in the world, you can have an accent. And what's wrong with our computers? Where are they made in what? What's the problem?
You'll get an exclamation mark in the middle of your name instead of an fada.
Yeah, or like I always get an at sign. It's like a really, really strong password.
Well, and the thing that's interesting, and maybe, can I put this all into one sentence or one thought? But what's so fascinating about the many, many ways in which we can look at the question of Irish language theatre, if we are to even use that term, and I think there have been some very interesting arguments to complicate that question that have come up this evening. But it's always about so many different machineries at work, right? Even something as simple as a newspaper saving money by not messing with fadas, that has a huge culture, or can have the potential to have a huge cultural or psychological or sociological impact. We've been talking about the mechanics of culture, of society. We've been talking about the mechanics of theater making. And I've just been exhilarated to hear about the specific kind of discussion of the mechanics of implementing Irish as one of the colors in the palette. And that's not to reduce it to a device, but that any form of expression, whether it's physical, whether it's vocal, whether it's visual, sonic, anything, they are all a color on the palette. And I mean, I don't want to presume to even begin to wrap up everything that's been said here. But the one thing that I was really struck by, both the beginning and the end of this conversation, as well as the middle, is the question of access, and what we're accessing. We started off this conversation by talking about what you access in Craigh na Cilla, but we've also talked about what you access, what you think about letting the audience into access, whether that's verbal or nonverbal in the way in which you make theater. This is a whole other conversation, but Morgan Cook in the comments has talked about first generation African and other nationalities who are getting the same Irish language education, and talking about people like Denise Chila using it. And as he says, it's a great and important step forward. And Axis's own video series, Breathe, today's episode, and Kate O'Neill, who's manning the, or who's personing the comments, You might drop the link to today's Breathe in there. That deals with that exactly. But this question of access, that it's not just about some sort of thing we should do in order to preserve something or in order to carry something forward because it is the right thing to do. But what it is to access this vital heat source that is this language and this performative tradition.
Yeah. It's
And
interesting
the
though.
funny thing is, go ahead, Mark.
I'm just saying how interesting it is in that the new generation of Irish people, they possibly speak 2 or 3 languages already. So the fact that you pick up another language, a language doesn't have the bagáiste that ours does. And Irish people we were the guinea pigs for like cultural colonialism, and it really worked on us. And generations on, it's still working. And so, in Europe, you're bordered by loads of countries. So being trilingual is more common than being monolingual. Is you're probably, who are you? Where have you been? Have you just come from a Brazilian tribe that speak your own? So monolingual, like, it's something that's quite common in the UK, but among certain parts of the population, and common in Ireland. And so the idea of being bilingual shouldn't be something like, it's not an issue for people who have come to here from another country, because they have another language and they have English. You travel in Europe and people are speaking to you in perfect English, and you kind of going, how is that? Because I feck all French, and you can go, why don't we? This, like Aoife, like you're saying, you've opened a big box here, and there's a lot, there's a lot to unpack from it. We just want to make shows.
That's the thing. That's what I was going to say. Like, you kind of putting aside or alongside everything we've already said. Like, I don't think any of us, when we're working, are kind of they're going, we're going to save the Irish language, or we're going to save Irish language theatre. We're kind of like, my experiences of working with Zita on productions with Moonfish, we're in the rehearsal room, we're having fun creating stuff. Part of the conversation might be Gaeilge, part of the conversation might be in English, and we're actually just focusing on doing the work. And like, it's such a joy to be able to work Gaeilge or bilingually, that in a way I kind of just want to share that with as many people as possible and make that open to as many people. And like, people who maybe, are unfortunate enough to inherit some kind of a chip on their shoulder about the language from their parents, I kind of feel like, oh no, just like let that go, because it's so much of it it's there for you. It's there for you to access. Or from the point of view of people who maybe might go and see shows made by Branner or Moonfish, like, you've got people who, if they're surprised by the fact that it's in Irish, they might be sitting there going, oh no, this is Irish, it's in Irish, I'm not going to understand it, I'm going to be excluded. And they kind of start writing their own narrative and exclude themselves for that reason, even though the theatre company are ticking every box to make sure that they're taking their hand and guiding them through the process. And like, there are some Irish people who have, a negative mindset towards the language, which will mean that if they were to say it in the same production as other people, they would understand less, because they're thinking, it's in Irish, I'm not going to understand this. Whereas in fact, if they would just let that go.
Yeah, and there's also the Irish language speakers who will tell you that you shouldn't be using English there, and why, you've just ruined that Irish show by putting English in it. So you can't please everyone. All we can do is make the show we want to make, and hope that the audience that we are thinking about are the ones that access it. And if we find other people, and other people find their way to the Irish language through watching a show that is accessible, well, that's great. Like, and I think we're never going to make anyone speak Irish by seeing one of our shows, but what we might do is make them accept it as something that's not scary. And that's
huge. I think that's a massive part of it, Mark, especially I think in making children's theatre too, and actually any type of theatre. It's a sense of seeing something. Like, if I never saw Chekhov, I think, gosh, would my life, there'd be a part of my heart that like has never seen Chekhov. And so if I'd never seen a show as Gaeilge, there's a richness there that I wouldn't have tapped into, even if I just went and experienced it. It's a part of the fabric of Ireland. And I think it's just so huge to be able to, like you say, Marc, it's not going to, people may not leave saying, I'm going to learn Irish, but maybe it'll just, people will leave going, that was fun, or I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And I think that's enough.
Yeah,
sometimes
I understood it.
to make something that, or I understood
Yeah,
it, or like I really like the life.
And feel less excluded from the language.
Less excluded from the language, yeah. And I remember we did a show for that toured to schools a couple of years ago, and it was in Irish and Irish, English, and there was one character who spoke Polish, and because Polish is the second language of Galway now. Irish is no longer the second language, a second most spoken language, if you like. And bringing it into schools, and straight away you'd spot the Polish children. As soon as the Polish is heard, he was sitting up like this. And afterwards, they've come up afterwards and said, I've never heard my language in school before. And you're kind of going, so it's language is really important for children to validate their existence, to validate, it's if they hear Polish from a teacher, if they hear Polish from a theatre company, then it in some way makes them feel part of this community, because we've thought about using their language, so I think that we need to get rid of this, like in some ways we get into schools under the curricular value of it's probably going to have Irish in it, but I think that what we should be there is like to make this, if there's going to be Irish, then there should be Polish, and we should be really good at speaking it. Like Catherine, who did that part, had a Polish neighbor, and she went and she learned it perfectly well as she could. But every school we went to, when the Polish children come up to us afterwards, we'd say, how is pronunciation, and maybe you do this, say this a little bit more, or whatever, so it's that thing of the power of a language is way more than the words, and I think that is what theatre can do. It can in some way bring that in an accessible, not offensive way to a community like a school or a theatre, and just say, look, this exists, and they all help to tell a story.
Well, I think that is a perfect sentiment to end this conversation on. I cannot thank you three enough. This has been absolutely extraordinary, and I wish we had hours and hours more to continue, and hopefully someday we will, very soon. But I thank you again. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us. And the score in the match is
and listen, before we go offline, I do want to say to everybody who's watching, I would encourage you to check out Access's social media channels, whether that's on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, or I think even TikTok now, but don't quote me on that, for information on the rest of the week's events with Scríobh. They're fantastic events, and you do not have to be an excellent Irish speaker. I have taken part in things and just been happy to be present for other folks using the language with much more facility, but it's for everybody, and I really hope people will check it out. Thank you again to the three of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's been watching in this evening. All right, have a lovely night. Yeah.